Hey everyone, and welcome to my September wrap-up. In the month of September, I wound up reading 15 books, which is the best month that I have had in this entire year. I do not anticipate me having any more months like that for my reading, just because that is quite out of the norm for me, but I am really happy with everything that I read this month, so let's just go ahead and get into it. So the first book that I read was Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross, and I gave this book 4 out of 5 stars. It was very engaging, and I thought that it was a really entertaining book. I absolutely flew through it. So basically this book follows our main character Iris, and she works for a newspaper in this town called Oath. And right now there is a war going on between a god and a goddess, and she is kind of undertaking writing about the war, and then she decides that she's going to go to the front lines and become a newspaper correspondent for the front lines of the war. And it is a romance as well. It's very fast-paced. I will say Iris as a character felt a little flat to me, and I feel like the rivalry between her and Roman was a little bit forced at times. Like, it didn't feel so much as a rivalry as it felt kind of like they were almost flirting with each other. Like the way that they would like annoy each other, for example, was Iris would take the books on Roman's desk and put them like page side out instead of spine side out. And I'm just like, that's not like something that you would do if you're actually trying to piss somebody off. That's just like something that you do to your friend to like joke around or to like flirt with somebody. It just didn't seem very believable that they were actually trying to bother each other. And it was clear that they found each other attractive. So I just didn't really buy the rivalry that we were supposed to believe. So yeah, I don't know. I just didn't find it that believable. The stakes in this book were very high and made the tension for certain situations even greater because they were at war. And so it was literally a like element of we might not get tomorrow, so we have to take every opportunity that we have for us today. That being said, the romance did move a little bit quickly, but I understand that because there was a literal war going on, and so like I said, it's like we might not have tomorrow, so we need to take every opportunity we have, so let's go ahead and pursue this romance and pursue each other even though we literally were just enemies like 2 days ago. I also feel like the world and the magic system could have been fleshed out more. I will say this does get reconciled in the second book. We get a lot more world building and stuff in the second book, but I do wish that we got more of it in the first book as well, just because there's a lot of things that are mentioned in the first book, like enchanted buildings and gods and goddesses, like I said before, and different like magical elements to society that just are kind of us expected to just accept those things. And it's an urban fantasy, so it's not like a fantasy where there's like dragons and magic is inherent to the system. It's like magic is not common, and so it just, I don't know, I just wish that there had been more world building. We got a lot of telling instead of showing about the gods, and for example, we got a lot of myths through Roman's letters, but we didn't really get to see the impact of the gods on everyday life for the mortals. And I feel like the story could have benefited from us seeing how the gods are impacting the mortals' day-to-day life outside of just like there being a war going on. Like, how is Enva and how is Dacker, like how are they contributing to humanity, and like what is their footprint on humanity? What does that look like? So there wasn't really a lot of that, and I feel like we should have gotten some more of that, and it would have benefited the story. The way it ended, however, made me immediately want to pick up the second book. Like I said, I flew through this book and it was very, very entertaining. There were some things that were lackluster, as I've said before, but for the most part, it was really, really entertaining and I had a really good time reading it. Following behind Divine Rivals, I read Ruthless Vows, also by Rebecca Ross. This is the second book in that duology. And for this book, I felt that it was dragged out a bit at times. There were quite a few chapters where I was just like, why is this even in the book? It didn't feel necessary at all. Also, the timeline of events was sometimes confusing because there would be moments where, so in this book, we're following Roman and Iris's point of view. And so there would be times where we're following Roman's point of view, and what's happening in Roman's point of view is concurrent with what's happening in Iris's point of view. And then there are other times where what's happening in Roman's point of view happens after what we just read in Iris's point of view. So it's kind of hard to keep the timeline straight at times, but it didn't really pull me out of the book that much. It's just something to be aware of. I also found myself really bored in certain points of the book, but there also were other parts of the book that really gripped me, so it kind of like ebbed and flowed. There wasn't a consistent like thrill throughout the book like the first one, where I just like couldn't put it down. There were times where in this book I had to like force myself to pick it back up again. And I also think the book would have benefited and been more engaging if we had only gotten Roman's point of view through his letters instead of getting his actual points of view. I just think that it would have been a lot more of a mystery for how certain things are happening, and I think we could have gotten more out of Iris's point of view, because Roman's point of view was mostly just like him pining and like contemplating how he was going to get out of certain situations. And so I think that it would have benefited the story more if we had just gotten his letters instead of his actual point of view. But yeah, overall I gave this 3 out of 5 stars. Next, I read Bookshops and Bone Dust by Travis Baldree, and this is the prequel to Legends and Lattes, and this follows our character Viv, who is an orc. It follows her before she winds up in Legends and Lattes, and I don't really want to say too much just because it is like a prequel to it, and so there's like certain things that would, I don't know, not necessarily spoil you for Legends and Lattes, but I think that it's best to go into this mostly blind. Just know that it is very, very cozy. There are great friendships. However, the plot and romance weren't really for me. I didn't think that they were blended very well. It kind of felt like we jumped back and forth between the plot and then the romance, and it felt like they were 2 separate things instead of one concurrent story. So that was kind of not frustrating, but it did pull me out of the story at times. And the romance also felt really pointless to me, just because we know something that happens in Legends and Lattes that makes the romance in this book kind of moot. So that was really frustrating. I didn't really see what the point was, and I don't know if that's just because I'm not typically one to have the kind of relationships that are in this book. It just didn't do it for me. There was one character though that carried the book for me. Whenever he was around, I was like super invested and very into the book and what was going on. But if he wasn't around, I just really couldn't find myself caring about the characters at all. There were seemingly low stakes, but there was a plot line that raised the stakes. But that whole situation was resolved way too easily for me, like way too easily. It just was resolved in a way that I was like, seriously? And I know it's a cozy fantasy, but it just felt like there should have been more. It should have been more fleshed out, and I think the book could have benefited from there being more of an ending to that plot line. But yeah, the epilogue was my favorite part of the book, and I think if you like cozy fantasy, then you'll really, really enjoy this. I'm not sure if cozy fantasy is for me, so I gave it 3 out of 5 stars, but if you like cozy fantasy, I would definitely recommend it. The next book that I read is A Song to Drown Rivers by Anne Liang, and I gave this book 4.5 out of 5 stars. This book follows Jishi, our main character, who is a representation of one of the 4 beauties of ancient China. And basically she is taken to the enemy kingdom to marry the enemy king and essentially be their spy and bring down the kingdom from within. So yeah, it was a really, really interesting book. I thought the concept was really interesting. I do wish that there was a map. There's no map to this, and there are a lot of like places mentioned, and so I wish that there had been a map to like reference as I was reading through the book, but it didn't really take me out of the story, so that's a really like minor complaint. The writing was beautiful, but not overly so. I will say though, Jishi as a character was kind of flat. She was so ready to just be self-sacrificing and never really acted the way she wanted to. Even when she was in a situation that demanded her to act a certain way, she still fell flat to me. Like, she was so ready to just like give up everything that she knew and everything in her life to be a part of this Wu kingdom. And even while she was there, she was so willing to just like hold her tongue and didn't really feel like she reacted to things in a way a human really would. So that kind of was a bit of a struggle for me. Just like, we got her internal monologue and it was like clear that she was struggling internally, but to not have any kind of outward reaction was a little bit unbelievable for me. But yeah, that's another like really small complaint. Fu Chai, the Wu King, was an interesting character because he was very contradictory. One moment he would be very loving and affectionate, and the next moment he would be absolutely brutal and cruel. And so it was just interesting to see how he like would frivolously suggest someone be flogged for the most minor things and then immediately be like, Xixi, I'll build a palace of pearls for you, and actually like go through with that. So he was a very, very interesting character. Also, this book does a really good job of showing both sides of the war and how each side sees the other side as the villains and themselves as the good guys. And so it really showed like the morally gray aspect of a war, and it kind of made you question who you were rooting for and which side you were even on, which I thought was really interesting. The overall tone of this book is definitely that of a tragedy. It is a very sad. It does not have a happy ending. Spoiler alert. But it is very sad. The ending was unexpected, but it didn't feel like it came out of nowhere either. I felt like it matched the overall tone of the book, and I didn't feel like it took away from the book at all. It definitely was sad, but it wasn't something that I was like necessarily angry about, if that makes sense. I just feel like it was very fitting for this book. I do wish there was more politicking instead of just like mostly Xixi internally planning. I wish there was more of like subterfuge and conversations between different people and things like that. There was some of that, but I do wish there had been a bit more. This book is really short, so it doesn't have a lot of space for that, but I do think it could have benefited from more fleshed out politicking between certain characters. We also get a lot of telling and not showing for certain things, and while it doesn't take you out of the story, I think the story could benefit from more fleshed out details. For example, there was a certain character that we were told things about, but we never got to see those things played out. It was just things that we were told about that character and were expected to believe that they were true, but we didn't get examples of those attributes being played out throughout the story. But overall, I really liked the story and I had a great time reading it. I think if you like Chinese myth retellings, I think you'll love this book. I think about this book a lot and I recommend it to pretty much everybody. So yeah, I highly recommend this one. The next few books that I read are Paper Girls Volumes 1 through 4. And these are by Brian K. Vaughan and Cliff Chang. Cliff Chang is the artist, Brian K. Vaughan is the writer. And these books follow a group of girls who are paper delivery girls. And one night, Halloween night actually, they are on their paper route and they stumble upon people who do not look like people, and they have like crazy eyes and have like futuristic weapons, and they think that they are aliens. But it turns out that this story involves a lot of time travel. It's very sci-fi, and there are a lot of dynamic relationships and diverse characters. Some of the language was very telling of the time. This story takes place in the late 80s, and there were times where I literally winced because of what characters said, and I was just like, oh, you should not say those things, like that is not appropriate. But it just reminded me of like the time that this is taking place in. Each volume ends off on a cliffhanger that really makes you want to immediately pick up the next volume. And there were some moments where like the timeline of certain characters was a bit confusing, but it never took me out of the story. And I also feel like that's to be expected when you're reading a book that's literally about time travel. So it kind of makes sense. Volume 3 was my favorite of the 4 that I've read so far, but I also want to just like let you know that if you are a parent, it might be very difficult to read that volume just because there are things that involve a baby that might be difficult to read. So I will say, like, I don't think this is a spoiler to say that a baby doesn't die, but there is child endangerment, and so it's hard to read that as a parent. But overall, the series is very fast-paced with really high stakes, and I really enjoyed my time reading them, and I gave them all either 4 stars or 4.5 stars. The next few books that I read were Attack on Titan volumes 1 through 4, and I gave the first 2 volumes 4 stars and the latter 2 volumes 3 stars. And these books are about a society of humans who live behind these 3 walls, and outside of these walls are these beings called the Titans that eat people. And so it's basically just a survival story of how the humans try to live their lives while under constant threat of Titans coming in their walls and eating people. So it's very dark, very violent. The plot moves really quickly when it's actually focused on the plot, but I feel like there's also a lot of filler that I just don't care about. And I did try to watch the anime at one point, but I found the art style to just not be for me. The art style in the manga is a lot more approachable than the art style in the anime. I also get really impatient with the filler, and I'm not really attached to any of the characters, which makes me not really want to continue the series. But I'm also like so curious about the Titans, and I want to know like how they got there and why they are the way that they are and things like that. But I don't know if I am invested enough to continue on with the series. I don't know if I care enough about wanting to know about the Titans to make up for the lack of connection to any of the characters and investment in the plot that I have seen so far. So I'm not really sure if I'm going to continue with this series or not, but yeah, so overall it's a pretty average series for me. The final books that I read this month were the Tea Dragon Society books. So the Tea Dragon Society, the Tea Dragon Festival, and the Tea Dragon Tapestry. And I gave them all 4 stars. They're extremely cute. The art style is so cute and so adorable. And I love it so much. It's very colorful and it just is it's very cutesy. And it is overall a very wholesome story. There are also queer elements. There are main characters who are queer, which I think is really wonderful. There are really endearing friendships. And the only complaint that I have is that the dragons didn't take much of a role in the story as I was expecting them to. But as I was reading through it, I kind of understood why that is. And it didn't take away from the story at all. So yeah, overall, I really enjoyed them, and I think they're super cute, and if you have a chance, I would highly recommend reading them. So yeah, those are all of the books that I wound up reading in the month of September. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys in my next video. Bye!